This is the Fundamental Escape podcast with your host, Mark Fitzgerald. Today on our 15th episode, we have Kathy Escobar, an author and pastor. So I have to say, Mark, listening to the episode with David, yourself, and Kathy, it was one of the most interesting because I feel like both of you have that same thing in common, that you left the church.
Yeah, well, I have to say, Kathy was very down to earth. She was very easy to converse with and to get along with. And I just wanted to say, an appreciation of her and her time with us. She seemed, just as interested in the responses that we had to the questions we were talking about as we were like listening to her, which, it was really quite a great conversation. So yeah, I'm sure you had a few thoughts to put out there in regards to the episode.
Well, I do think that it was really interesting that she left and is starting a new journey, which I feel like you are doing as well. And it was interesting to me when she said she was so good at being a Christian, being a good Christian. And I almost wanted to scream on the episode while I was listening. It's not about being a good Christian. It's about faith. And so, but I do sympathize with those who have been hurt by the church, of course. And I've seen those within the church that have hurt others. And of course, being hypocritical, as you would hear a lot of the time. But we do need community to grow in faith. And I still practice my faith within a church setting. And I feel like that, she did mention that people are scrambling. The church is scrambling in order to figure out what to do because people are leaving, this mass exodus of people leaving the church. And, for those who haven't grown up in the faith, but have given up on the church, I know that is a separate story, and maybe those people also connect with her. So it sounds like she has a community that she connects with, and it's more than just telling a faith story, which was really interesting to me. But as a millennial myself, I know that a lot of people, they'd feel like they can just Google everything. So they don't need to have this type of theological education. But I think what they're missing is the community that there can be in church. And my husband always says it best that, there's always going to be something you don't like about the church or that you don't believe with 100%. But I do believe in thinking for yourself. And she mentioned that at the end, that it's so important to just not be fed something, but to really search and be on a journey. So with that, I think let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Fundamental Escape podcast. I'm here today with my co-host, David Weber. Do you want to say hi there, David?
Hello, people.
And our special guest today is Kathy Escobar, who is a pastor, author, speaker, a pot stirrer, apparently, and a few other things. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Kathy, and just a little bit about what you do, and just talk about the different people you're engaged with sort of day to day?
Sure, yeah. Hi, it's good to be with you guys. Always happy to have these kinds of fun conversations about faith and life and the crazy stories we all find ourselves in these days. The work that I do is just mainly engaged with people who are somehow on the fringes of life and faith. I always kind of put those, they're not two separate categories, but a lot of the friends that we work with at the Refuge that journeyed with for a long time, and then just my own story of just what it is to be people that are living real life and kind of on the harder side of things, I would say, of just pain. And we work with a lot of people in poverty, mental illness, addiction, loneliness, disconnection, just pain. And then that's just seemed to intersect related to faith. That's where my story enters in. And just a lot of people who used to maybe be sitting in a place that felt secure and felt easier and felt certain and felt clear and isn't so much anymore. And the mess can create.
Yeah,
So.
can I just start the conversation off by putting my hand up for that category? Because that's basically me. Um, your book was actually recommended to us by Reba Riley, because we talked to her on the podcast as well. And so I haven't, obviously I haven't read the whole book, Faith Shift, but I started reading the preview chapter on Amazon. And obviously, the title of chapter 1 kind of grabbed me. You're not crazy and you're not alone, which I thought was quite amazing. And then you sort of go into this, the story about this woman Jessica, who basically, you open with the line that says, "I'm not sure what I believe about Jesus anymore, and it scares me." And I'd be keen for you to maybe expound on that a little bit, because I think that line, sort of opening the book, would resonate potentially with a lot of people.
Yeah, it's scary when everything that used to be so clear isn't so clear anymore. And so, that's a lot of my story, really, is that I didn't come from a Christian family, but ended up turning my life over to Jesus in a very clear and directed way, and it changed, the course of history for me. And in that season, kind of growing as a Christian and learning the rules and kind of figuring out what that meant, it just really felt super clear to me. What it meant to belong, what you needed to believe, what I needed to do, what I needed to say, how I needed to behave, all of those kinds of things. And then through it's a long story, but through starting to get more honest, really, about my own story of pain and shame from my past and the family I grew up in, and just where does that fit in to sort of feeling excited about a simple path related to Jesus. The way it was taught to me is if you pray harder and you work harder and you believe harder, then everything's easier.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really the case for me. It's like I developed two people, like there's an outside and an inside person. And my outside person did really well in the Christian system. And then my inside person was really withering. And so when that inside person, like my true feelings about God and questions I had and doubts I had and how I felt about myself and how I felt about some of my relationships and in relationships, like all those things started to come out to the surface, the systems that I was in didn't quite know what to do. And so what I mean by that, and some of you guys, I'd like to hear more from you too, like when you become really honest what people around you do that are used to you kind of playing by certain rules. And so.
No, Kathy, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I've been reading through your blog, and I also took a peek at the Refuge Online, which is the place that you co-pastor. And I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, you're a prolific creator and writer, and you have a lot to say, a lot to get out. I'm just curious, like, when that started. Like, was that how you were your whole life, or did you just reach this point? It's like, man, I need to talk to people. I need to write. I need to help people. Was there like some type of event that just spurred that on?
Well, kind of what happened to me. I mean, I have been pushing again. So, really, today's my 25th wedding anniversary. And I have a daughter who's almost 22. So everything kind of started for me almost 22 years ago, where really, I don't know what I said, that sort of inside and outside, I started to let some of the inside out. And in a safe place. It was this little teeny women's group in a conservative church, and everyone was a little afraid to be super honest. And then we did, and we started to feel more free. Then what kind of happened is the church didn't really like that. It's like there was push against not being enough Bible, not, kind of being inwardly focused and those kinds of things. I ended up moving away a few years later, but the reason why I bring it up is because ever since then, I have been on my own healing journey and in systems trying to create places of honesty, and I've always gotten push because there's always push against honesty. Mm-hmm. So it kind of where it all culminated for me, and it was gosh, it's been 9 years, a little over 9 years ago. I was on a big church staff, and I was in healing ministry, trying to create safe places, and focus on friends on the margins and what it's like to kind of create equality in that we're humans and there's not sort of the healthy and the sick. And it's so funny to me. Well, it's not funny. It's like a dark comedy, how that is like against the grain, that honesty and pain and true feelings and all those things is against the grain. And so there was just a lot of push against that, kind of like, we don't want to talk about real things and we don't want people to have real questions. And for me, some was power. And so I ended up losing a job that I really loved. It was a big, crazy, organizational thing. But what it did to me is it pushed me out. I had been kind of holding on, rubbing against it for many years, but it's like it all came to a head then. And then that's when, honestly, everything just kind of came tumbling down. Like, why am I still a Christian? Why am I still part of the church? Why do I care? They quote unquote, the system has not really been very good to me in all kinds of ways. And so not safe, all these things kind of started to happen. And that's when I started to write. So that's kind of where it came. And if you read early things on my blog, oh my gosh, I was just, and I still am like, I'm still processing a lot of things out loud. I'm far from done, but I was just so mad. And it felt so good to just say it and to not edit it. And that's what I love for people to do. That's why I'm a firm believer in finding spaces, even though it's so vulnerable. And it's so vulnerable to tell your honest truth of what you're struggling with God and personally. But when you do, it's really free. So that's kind of how it all evolved. I didn't really mean to. I never set out to. I actually just kind of needed to let some of the stuff out. Or I was going to go crazy.
Yeah. You sort of hinted, and I did have a look at one of your blogs, which was basically hinting at the idea of scapegoating, like saying, oh, we're not like those people, sort of thing. And I came across a quote by Peter Rollins that sort of resonates with that idea quite well. And I've just got it here. It says, the point then is to help break the false distinction between the idea that there are those who are whole and those who have a lack. For the true distinction is between those who hide their lack under the fiction of wholeness and those who are able to embrace it. So I thought that's kind of like further elaborates on what you were sort of saying. And I think, my experience, you sort of were asking about our experiences and things like that. But I grew up in the church all my life. That was my world. Jesus was everything, and it was all about certainty and having the answers. And there wasn't much sort of focus on journey and process and going through pain and suffering and acknowledging your own humanity in a way. It's sort of like one thing I was saying to a friend the other day was, when you become a Christian, sometimes in a strange way, you almost lose your humanity. It's like, I'm not a human, I'm a Christian. And you kind of, there's this like blurry line, and you don't acknowledge your feelings and you don't acknowledge where you're at, sort of thing, if that sort of makes sense. And obviously it seems to me that that's part of, with the people you're encountering and engaging with, that seems to, a lot of the work we're trying to do with the podcast is kind of aiming at people who are like church burnouts and people that have been through it all and been sort of come out the other side, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing that we just keep finding people like you. When we started this podcast, we're like, man, I wonder if we're going to like struggle to find guests. And we're like, not to sound arrogant or anything, I mean, we're like a month backed up already. And we're like, man, we just keep finding people that have stories like yours, who are writing books and blogging and just want to talk more to people that are in similar situations, like a church refugee or a burnout, or, all the phrases that you creatively use on your blog.
Well, it's so true. There's so many of us. And even in the last 9 years, kind of exiting, institutional church in the way that I had grown up in it. So many people are not there anymore that used to be. And everyone's trying to find their way. I really love that quote. It's really good, from Peter Rollins. And then what you just shared about the sort of our insides and our outsides and sort of becoming integrated. And I kind of feel like that's what so many, I always just call everyone sort of phase shifters, are trying to do, is just become more integrated.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point of that before we forget. It's like Faith Shift is your latest book, and it looks like you're also doing like Faith Shift processing parties. Do you want to kind of talk about that? It looks like you're doing it at like yoga studios and various different places.
Yeah, see, for me, I mean, I like small and I like intimate and I like processing. Like I'm not interested that much anymore in just like a one-way conversation. And so people want to engage. So what I just wanted to create spaces, because even you guys know this, being, you met online and you work online, and I love online. There's something very valuable about it. It saved me in so many ways, the connections that I made over the last chunk of years in the online world. But there's nothing like being in the room with other people. And that is what's hard usually, is to find other people that are safe enough to talk about this with. And so that was kind of the idea of the facial processing parties. I did a chunk of them when the book first came out, and then earlier this year, and then took a break. And now I'm going to do a couple more this fall. But I love to have a group of people to kind of walk through considering our own faith stories. And it's not just to sit around and tell your whole story. That's not how we do it. It kind of walks through the major movements of the book, and this idea that most of us, we fuse and kind of go through the sort of learning all the rules. And like you were saying, Mark, you just live and breathe Jesus, and that looks different for everybody. But most of us have this like season where you get, certainty and conformity and affiliation, and it's really strong. And then most people get rumbly, and things just start to kind of go, I don't know. And there's a restlessness about questions we might have about the Bible or the system or why we're doing church this way or whatever. But a lot of shifting people, there's a ton of just shifting people. A lot of people just go back because it's kind of scary to let things go. And the faith shifting processing party is more about unraveling. Those of us that, when things shifted, we couldn't just go back to where we were. It all came apart. And that's a big grief process, and it's really hard on people. So the parties are a way, I like to put parties on things because it's not sitting around, crying and telling your heart's deepest, darkest secret, but it is kind of honoring, but also eating and laughing and looking back and thinking, here's my story.
I think, Kathy, just to give a bit of context to people listening, obviously in your book Faith Shift, you give some statistics on, churchgoers and what's sort of happening in this trend of people moving away from, certain types of belief. And I thought I would just go through some of these just for people to create a bit of context around our conversation. So basically you say, you reference this woman, Jessica, at the beginning of the book, and you say that Jessica is part of a growing trend. So you say 1 million churchgoers will leave their church this year, and this number is continuing to rise. 23% of young adults are leaving the church due to significant intellectual doubts about their faith. The fastest growing religious group in the US is a category of people who they say have no religious affiliation, sometimes called the nuns, which is N-O-N-E-S, obviously, by social scientists, and this number has more than doubled since 1990. Current surveys indicate they make up 16% of all Americans. Many of those who have given up on organized religion, however, they have not given up on faith. So obviously, that sets a bit of a tone for what we're talking about, just to say, this is important. Like, this is not just a small number of people going, hey, I'm having a few questions here. Like, this is big, right?
It's big. Don't you guys think? Aren't you like seeing it? And
totally.
Absolutely. I mean, I've felt that. Like, I've felt the feeling that those stats support, but I've never found a place to like pull stats from. I'm curious where, like, what are you referencing when you're pulling those stats? Is this?
I would say probably those stats. I mean, that was like Pew Research kinds of things, Barna, different, and it was a combination. It's all referenced in the book, but the truth is, those are all from a chunk of years ago already. From the time you start until the time the book comes out, a couple of years have progressed, and they ramped up. And I think I might say it in Faith Shift. I'm pretty sure it says it right after that, and I know it's true. It's just like, you don't even need the stats. You just have to look around and feeling.
No, absolutely. That's what I was saying about doing this podcast. It's what Mark and I felt, and we talked about it. Now we start interviewing people. We start just going into chat rooms and Periscope and Blab and all these places. I'm like, wow,
Well,
here they are.
David,
Here are the real people, and we're having the
do
conversation
you want to
with
just
them.
quickly share that story that we talked about yesterday, that guy you came across who listened to our podcast?
Yeah, I want to have him on the show. I didn't ask him yet, so I won't say his name, but it's just a new friend that we made at Blab. And if you've never heard of Blab, it's blab.im, blab.im. So we were having a chat a couple days ago, and he was telling me his story, and I'm guessing he's in his 70s, in his early 70s, and he said he started listening to our podcast. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm like, what's your story? He said about 5 years ago, so in his late 60s, he finally became agnostic after an entire life of Christianity. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I said, what happened? Was there some type of event or story? And he said, yeah, just analysis of the Bible stories like Exodus, and he just kind of listed a few that over time he realized it just can't be true. That's not the message. It's not truth. It's more of a parable. Then he said he was at dinner one day about to say grace like he has for the past 70 years, and he said, I just couldn't do it anymore.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Like that was it. He just stopped saying grace one day before dinner, and then he just became agnostic. And it's like, wow, okay, there was no major event, but in a way it's like even more powerful, because it's just all of a sudden I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah. So one thing I just want to jump in here with, I'm a bit of a salesman, Kathy, I have to say, so I'm going to shamelessly plug your book on your behalf. I hope that's okay.
I'm a terrible salesman. I'm like the world's worst marketing. Don't make me sell anything.
No, it's fine. I'll do it for you. It's totally fine. Obviously, in the first chapter of Faith Shift, you have the list of what you call symptoms of a faith shift. And I have to say that I basically resonated with every single one of them. I read through and I was just like, yep. Yep. So what I'll do, I don't know if I'll necessarily read all of them, but I'll maybe just pick a few. So obviously start off by saying, so see if any of these statements describe you. I haven't picked up my Bible in a long time, and I don't have any desire to. I don't even know how to articulate where I am spiritually these days. I've experienced a significant shift in my theology or faith perspective and find myself feeling disorientated and unsure. I have strong negative reaction to words, phrases, Bible passages, and worship songs that used to bring me comfort and peace. There's a few more here. The next one did make me laugh. It says, I find myself swearing more than I ever have in my life. I did find that amusing. But there's a few other quite serious ones. I feel sad, angry, afraid, lost after a painful church experience. I secretly worry that God is angry with me and disappointed with me. You talk about things like, I wonder if God even exists sometimes and that sort of thing. I think I might jump down to the last one. Oh, no, there's one here. It says, I feel scared that if I share some of these doubts and concerns out loud, I will be judged, scripturized, or ostracized. That to me is probably one of the biggest ones to highlight, I think, because when you're somebody who grows up in the church or in a faith environment, it's connected to your family, your friends, your social structure. It's everything. So, for me to move apart from that is like, it is traumatic. It's a huge thing,
Yeah. So there's like 15 questions in there, Kathy. Can you answer all of them?
Well, I really like that line. I love, we always joke about the word scripturized, but what you're describing, Mark, is so that feeling of how much loss there is. That's what it boils down to, because when we shift in beliefs that we used to hold really tightly to, we release them and they change and we lose them, basically. Then you lose structures, like the churches and systems or groups or networks, those things that we used to belong to in such a strong and clear way. we lose them, and then there's people that make up those groups. And so, we lose friends. And then what happens to a lot of us, this happened to me, and I think it happens to so many people I know, is that a lot of times we lose our identity. Like, who am I now? And who am I now? I was a really good Christian woman. Like, I know the rules. I know how to do it. Was so good at it. And now I'm an ex-good Christian woman, and I don't know what that even means. And so many of the containers out there are so unsafe to talk about it. And even now, honestly, and as you guys evolve in this podcast, it'll be really fun to see how it evolves for you guys. And I'll look forward to kind of following along, because
I already want to we're gonna have to do like a part 2, maybe like in 3 or 4 months. I'm just going through your blog. I mean, there's just tons of discussion points. We can go like 10 ways churches jack people up. I mean, it's like, if you do you want to say a few of those right now?
Oh, that's a whole other conversation, but probably it all goes to what you just said.
Let's just do the top 3 maybe.
No, what's so hard is, what churches, what I was going to kind of say that I want to add in, because it fits into what you just said, David,
right.
Is that the reality is that a lot of the work being done right now, and this is what's a little discouraging, quote unquote, to me right now, is that the church is scrambling to try and figure out how to keep people. And trying to figure out this whole group of the dones, quote unquote, the dones. And so there's a movement, how do we help the dones find their way again? Yeah. And instead of, in my opinion, the more prophetic voice is that the dones, those that are done in different ways, most are not done with God completely or faith completely. That has not been my experience. It might have different language and it might not be as clear like Jessica in the book, this Jesus thing. But for most people that I know, there still is a strong pull. And I really think actually the new expressions should come from them. And the church is we still live in this system. That's still what sells books. It's still what runs conferences. It's still, and it gets a lot of attention right now. And I have a lot of strong reactions to it. That's like the church is asking the wrong question. Yeah. Instead of following where a lot of people actually are leading. It feels like the Spirit to me is kind of leading people, but it's not valid.
Well, we talked on episode 3 of our podcast, we talked to a New Zealand guy. His name's Gus Rowe, and I sort of joked actually that this conversation might be kind of the female equivalent to that conversation. But he's a bit similar in the thinking side of things. He actually spoke about the whole concept of the duns and everything as well. He was someone that ran a huge evangelistic ministry in New Zealand, and then basically about 8 years ago, just dropped off the radar essentially, and was just like, I'm done with church as a structure sort of thing. But he's not done with faith, like you say, he hasn't given up on faith in Jesus. He's given up on this organized structure. And we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast with things like podcasting and social media, and the way that, we can put these podcasts out and connect with people like you and Reba Riley and different people who are on these journeys. And there's no authority structure like you see in a church. Like we kind of have free reign to go, we can have these open conversations. This isn't our income. We can talk about whatever we want, sort of thing.
Yeah, which is amazing. And people want to talk about it. I mean, sometimes I'm really, I'm stunned almost at how hungry people are for places to process it. And how, you really want to be with other people who understand. And that's kind of what happened to me. And that's how I entered into blogging. And the people I met, some of my friends that I met early on, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, in that range, I think I started blogging 8, and everything kind of came coming down in 9, is that we really bonded in a really powerful way. And it's been wild to see where everyone, continues to land. There's not like a landing spot. Like, I haven't landed. I've made more peace. I have more peace today, than I had even a couple of years ago, but I'm evolving. And I think that didn't get taught in my old faith structure. It was kind of like you just sort of landed somewhere and sort of ended there.
I did watch a video on Facebook, I think it was, where you were talking about, there was some part of it where you were sort of talking about the idea of like hoping that those old feelings would come back, like those old feelings of certainty and like this presence of God as we would describe it, I guess. But you're just like, it's not coming back. But what is coming back is something more expansive, sort of thing.
Yeah, would you guys feel that sometimes? Like, gosh, I just
I don't know. Honestly, I think, to be quite honest, this podcast for me is a little bit of like therapy, to tell you the truth. I don't know. Like I'm still working things out, and I've come from a place of absolute certainty. I'm a very evangelistic person. I've done like, street preaching and stuff like that. And, so I was very certain about where I was coming from, and things sort of disrupted for me and caused me to change and things like that. So I don't know. I'm definitely still in process. I can say that with confidence.
Well, yeah, Kathy, I mean, you're a co-pastor at the Refuge, and that website is therefugeonline.org. And I can't remember where I read it, but I think you said that you feel like co-pastoring is kind of the best way to like run a community. And I agree with that. So I hope I'm quoting you correctly, but just so there's, just different voices, and it's not just one authoritative figure telling you the way it is and follow me like too many guys do out there who run the mega churches. I just think it's the wrong way to run it. On top of that, you kind of have a list on the website that just says what we believe so far. And I'm curious for maybe a little explanation of some of the points. So I'll just say a few, like Jesus meant everything he said, and then you just say the Bible. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I like that statement. We created that at the very, very beginning of the Refuge. And the Refuge is a really interesting community in that it does hold the tension of these differing beliefs and people all over the place related to faith in one place. But I'm going to tell you, it's really hard to do. Because it's just so much easier if you have a homogeneous group that sort of all align underneath a core set of beliefs. That's where we all came from. It was just clear. If you look at almost any church website, one time I did an exercise on that, and you know what? It might have been the catalyst for that church's jack up post, because I went a little crazy in the process because I couldn't even believe what was on all the websites. And there was these long lists of doctrinal beliefs that were sort of like, this is what we believe. And they were really long and they were super clear. And so pastoring a community, we planted it. We were in a different place 9 years ago. And, we're a co-pastor team. So two of us kind of came from the same big church together. We were in different roles. And then we have a third co-pastor. And then we have a bunch of people that are pastors, to be honest. I mean, we just kind of think about it a teeny bit more than some other people. But the truth is that it's really community led. And one of our dilemmas, so when you say the Bible is our central text. We have another piece on our website that's our invitation to community, and that's probably what we use a lot more. We say that more, and we kind of say that we share a sweeping, a guiding story, a sweeping epic drama called the Bible. Like that's what we have as our core text, because it is our core text. I mean, the people who are at the Refuge came from a Christian tradition. And so, there's a few friends that were Buddhists in their past and some different things, but on the whole, we came from Christian roots and have Christian roots. But related to the Bible, we're all over the place. And so like even my friend who I co-pastor with, we have, he's a little more to the right and I'm more to the left on some views about the Bible. And it's been really hard doing that together. But what's so beautiful about it is that we've stuck it out. And I think it's really not sort of just between him and I. It's kind of representative of the wider world in a way. And certainly our wider community is that everyone has the ability to intersect with the Bible and come to different conclusions and see its authority different, to see its interpretation of it different. And that is like in evangelical circles, I know people even listening to this, some people are like, wait a second. but it says this, or it's for sure this, it's for sure that. And I've just really changed in that department. I value it. I think it's super important. And that's why we have it on that belief so far. We're not using a different book in our conversations. But we are using other things too that come in and kind of point to that. It's the text we all have to wrestle with. And I think that people who are in this middle of this faith shift thing, unraveling that, the Bible gets really toxic. It got toxic. It's still a little toxic for me. I'm doing better, but it's hard for me. And I sometimes at that part, I think I explained in that video, is like, sometimes I do want it to be easier, where I just opened it and it said exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I don't have that feeling anymore, but it does challenge me. And I think it's an amazing book. And I think it teaches us a lot of really cool things that are super core. But
it's interesting. You talk about this sort of, I can't remember the exact phrase you used about the Bible being this like powerful sort of drama narrative sort of idea. Paul Young, he's the author of The Shack, and he's just brought out the new book called Eve. And so I've been listening to the audiobook of it. I've just started yesterday, but I have to go back and probably start again and listen through to it again. But, I think one of the great things that someone like him does, is that, he sort of reminds you that it is a narrative, that it is the story, and it sort of takes away from this dogma doctrine, like, here's A, B, C of what you need to agree with. And, I think we've lost that. And I totally agree with you about, the Bible becoming toxic. And I guess there's a couple of questions that come to mind practically, for anybody who would find themselves or feel that they would be in the same situation as, say, this woman, Jessica, that you refer to in Faith Shift, or anyone who's essentially at a place where they're questioning and they may be feeling guilty about it, and they're sort of, their faith is starting to be disrupted. Is there anything you would say, or like any way you would sort of practically point them in the direction of, sort of thing?
The first thought that comes to mind is just definitely to honor your feelings, like to acknowledge them, because they're rolling around in there, or they're coming out in there for a reason. Like they're not separated from something bigger that's going on, and we just don't need to clean up our feelings. Like they're pointing to something. Yeah. And so, I think on a really practical level, and that's why things like the work you're doing, and a lot of friends that I know, things that are online, ways that we can sort of acknowledge you're not crazy and you're not alone. And it's actually a good thing. And so it's a good thing. The reason why it doesn't feel always like a good thing. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I'm really grateful I am where I am, but I miss some of the old things because it was just easier. This is like a little uncharted territory. And so what I would always say to somebody, and what I just said to somebody today who's really wrestling, and she's a dear friend, kind of a new friend in the last year or two, and it's really hard to wrestle with the truth of what of some of her beliefs changing in a system that she's in that really thinks she's wrong. And so one of the things that I said is that you really can't take care of the other people. You just can't. We have to live with other people's disapproval, and kind of sit in that spot where we cannot take care of everybody around us. And that's really hard. A lot of us, we value relationship, and we want our families to approve of us, or we want to still belong.
Yeah. So Kathy, forgive me if this is repetitive, but I mean, Mark and I, we talk to fundamentalist Christians as well. And even they admit that there's a lot of problems in Christianity, just the state of Christianity today. And in this, in our podcast, we're trying, it's a journey, but we're also trying to figure out like the core of the problems. And you mentioned one of your favorite posts at your blog is the difference between building churches and cultivating communities. Do you maybe want to kind of explain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the most important things that I think is really missing in the wider world, certainly Christian community, is this idea of the power of real community. And so when you're focused on building a church, and I know I've been part of churches that built, I was part of building some, is that you just you do things to make it work. And one of the main ways that you make it work is you kind of align around a certain degree of conformity, certainty, and affiliation. Kind of those are things infusing. You just do. It makes things go. And
No, I know a lot of people that go to church for the specific reason of being part of a community, and they don't necessarily like believe in all of what they're taught and told in church. So I think I just find that strange, and it's like, and I look at the Refuge, and that's what it is. It's a community, and it's not about like building a church and collecting funds from people to build mansions for the pastors.
They could be doing that.
There ain't no mansions in this. I'm 100% sure. The truth is, and that's why, building churches, I always just say it's not that hard. It's not. You kind of like get the same people, believe the same thing, look the same no matter what size it is, and then you make a structure, and then you have people fit into the structure, and then you find a way to feed the structure. And so I don't think that that's that complicated. I think it is becoming a little more complicated right now because so many people are shifting, but people are definitely still pulling it off. And the truth is that real community where you are there, like kind of in the thick of it, around relationship and story and real life, and that you don't take out the sacred and the secular and just make it to, it is really, I love Richard Rohr and the idea
Yeah, he's
of
awesome.
just
I like him too.
you not being a dualist, and building churches is usually built on some degree of dualism. And in each community, there's something about holding a lot of different contradictions in paradox and in intention, paradox and tension. And that's, the Refuge is full of paradox. And honestly, it's the beautiful part of it. And it's the hard part about it because it's a lot easier to kind of do the homogeneous thing. And when you have like people all over the place related to what we do believe about the Bible, Jesus, God, just all kinds of different images of God, different ways to connect with God, all those things, and you're trying to like hold it all. It's really hard, but actually then what you get is people who really want to just be with each other. They're not there for those other reasons. And
it's interesting. I mean, you sort of brought up Richard Rohr, who I'd love to speak to him at some point. Actually, I think he's great. I've heard a little bit of stuff from him, but I actually heard him talking about the whole subject of hell and the whole sort of way we view God and things like that. And he basically, this is kind of ties into the final point I sort of wanted to wind down with, I suppose, me and my background being a bit of an evangelist and stuff like that, where he talks about how most Christians have this view of God that is completely unworkable, he says. Like, you believe in a God that, you're essentially a kinder person than you believe God is, sort of thing. And he's just like, what do we do with that? And I think it ties a little bit into what we were talking about earlier about, the fear that's connected around, not just the social structure and the relationships that get broken, but the fear of like, I can't honor my feelings because this is the truth and I just have to hold it up no matter what, and that becomes a huge problem. And so I'm curious if you've had, I'm sure, no doubt you've experienced people in those sort of spaces as well. Like, that's a huge part of where I want to speak to as well, is that whole letting go of that fear and saying, hey, it's okay, you're allowed to be human, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's so funny, like, why is that such a stretch? And the truth is it's a stretch. And maybe because really, we have this human thing inside of us that we want to control. We really want to control. And to be honest, and this is hard, some of us want to be controlled. It was a little easier when someone sort of told me what to believe and how to do it, and I just learned. You just follow, and it takes some of the personal agency out of it. And so what it looks like to let go of control, I know that's the part for quote unquote churches that are so hard for them, is to let it go. For those of us that are trying to find our way, we really have to not just try and plug into something else. We call that a spiritual bypass in our walking. My friend Phyllis Mathis, who I do a walking wounded class for people who have really been quote unquote hurt deeply by church, because there's lots of those wounds out there. And it's in the book too. There's something about we want a quicker fix. So we do an end around, and the end around is just find something that feels better without reckoning kind of the deeper story inside. That's unfolding.
It's like quite superficial almost, I guess.
And then, and that's okay too. I mean, gosh, there's not like grades for this, and, there's not a clear math.
There totally is.
You're the real deal, and you're not. But the truth is that a lot of people are just looking. That's why they'll just land at a different church that maybe looks a little cooler, sounds a little cooler, but underneath kind of probably has some of the same structures, and they'll tolerate it. Kind of what you were saying, David, is because you just want community. And so you keep feeding something because you really want that. And there's just, my hope is always that there'd be little pockets of love and freedom that would emerge where people would really, truly say the things that they're really thinking and feeling in a body.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy. It's been amazing to chat with you. Did you have any final words to leave us with, kind of thing, or?
Oh, I got something, Mark. I'm just going to say Kathy's website is kathyescobar.com, and a few of her latest posts talk about 3 phrases that bother you. Kathy, how about you pick one of them and let people go find the other 2 at your website? How about "but God says"?
Yeah, I did. It's "but God says I'm not like those people," and coming in a couple of days is "we just want more meat." They just drive me crazy, all 3 of those. But, the one that probably resonates the very most is "but God says." And, for the sake of closing this conversation, there's just so many of us that were kind of, it's happening now and it happened to us. And we pretend, I did it. I said that to people. But God says. And it really is, it's not honest. It's not honest. And so it's been used to really hurt people. And people are longing for a more honest interpretation of wrestling on our own, and trying to say, well, this is how I see what God says, and how that changes everything. It just has the attitude of humility and humanness, and that this God trump card getting played is really, really jacking a lot of people up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it all leads back to interpretation of the Bible, right?
Yeah, and it's actually I think I say to the post, it's just like a lie, but God says it's a lie. And it happens all the time. It's like happening right now as we're talking. There's a whole bunch of people hearing that message somehow. But God says, the Bible says, and then what we think is whatever comes out of that person's mouth is 100% true about what God says. And that's why so many people are wrestling with a distorted image of God. And I kind of think this process is about a renewed image of God, a new image of God, and that is worth seeking when the image that we have does not lead to freedom and life and love and peace. It leads to shame and fear and bondage and hiding.
Awesome. That is a fantastic place to leave the conversation, I think.
Yeah, we're going to leave people wanting more, but we will talk again.
Oh, it was great hanging out with you guys. It's so fun. Thanks for reaching out, and I love what you guys are doing. And
yeah, thank you, Kathy. It was awesome.